Welcome to pop.0 with Bryan Chaffin and John Keith.
Today is Wednesday, November 1st, 2017, and somehow, I don't know how, but somehow this is still a podcast, a video podcast even, for the Mac Observer. I'm Bryan Chaffin, editor-in-chief for TMO.
And I still am not broadcasting. There we go. And I am John Keith. And I still take issue that this is still not a podcast until we're actually podcasty syndicated.
That's a fair point that we will debate another time, preferably after I have that solved. And the other voice you heard and maybe a face you saw flash across your screen would be Walt.
Hey, how are you? Hopefully this is working.
It is. We see you, and hopefully the hostages will let you go soon.
That's right. That's right. If I get dragged off by something or someone, that won't be good.
So as always, we have three topics and we're lying. And today, those topics are you anti or pro notch? Saucy. And then the rest of this is kind of a necro episode because iLife is dead. It is the second topic, and then
why Walt? You mean iWork? iWork, right?
iWork, iLife, all of it.
iLife was not dead, but go ahead.
Well, that can be part of the discussion. And why Walt is here for his expertise in zombie physics.
I feel so important. From headphones to zombie physics. Nice.
That is right. It's an important topic that has not gotten nearly the coverage it deserves. We're going to rectify that here today. But first, let's talk about the notch. And before we get into the pros and cons, I guess let's just take a sampling poll. Bryan and then Walt, what do you think about the notch? You cool with it? You pro? You against? You don't give a shit?
I'll kick that off. So I'm not exactly pro notch. I do, however, strongly suspect that it will be a non-issue.
Well, we're done with that topic. All right, and Walt, what is your view on it? The high level view.
Sorry, Google Hangouts is lagging a little here on me. Yeah, I think I'm in the don't really care, and I don't think it's going to have. Well, I don't think it's gonna have an issue either, like Bryan on that part. But I'm not sure that I have a strong view at the moment.
We're gonna get used to it. It's gonna be a little bit different. It's gonna be a lot different, and for at least 2 or 3 days, and at which point we'll stop noticing it. Those of us who have them. I mean, screenshots shoot with the notch, not a notch. Photographs will not have the notch in them unless you're looking at them on the iPhone 10, and it's just going to become just a complete non-issue. And when we were talking about this before the show, John, you were making a lot of points about the physics of what's going on and the kinds of options one has if one wants a truly bezel-less device.
So first off, everyone that's against the notch, go fuck yourself. Just as a starting fucking moron, fucking stupid people. If you like the idea of a full screen phone, there is going to be something akin to a notch, because the only alternative, I can think of two fucked up alternatives. All right, one is that the cameras and sensors are somehow underneath the screen, right? And so now the camera has to work through the screen, which is going to really fuck up the optics of any camera on that's working through it. Or you could also have, instead of a notch where the top part is cut out, you just have little donut holes for all the sensors all the way through. But the problem with the donut hole idea is if there's OLED light emanating around it, that light bleeds into the camera and fucks with any image. So you have to make that aperture get bigger and bigger. And if it's big enough, it's creating a notch anyway. But anyway, it messes with the optics going through the underside of the camera, and it's not likely to be realistic. The second,
well, wait a minute. What if you're like jumping ahead 2, 3, 4 years, maybe 10 years, I don't know, whatever. And let's assume that a bezel-less device is still relevant at that point, and we have enough processing power to throw into it, to throw at a camera, to deal with any kind of interference that you might get from actually putting the lens just underneath the screen.
So I think what will always happen is something that doesn't have extra crap in front of the optics, meaning non-optical glass in front of it, is always going to mess and dilute the optics. I guess, you know, to your point, maybe it gets to the point where the delta between that and a camera lens that is not encumbered by that crap get close enough. But I think light bleed is difficult to deal with. And thankfully, you know, Walt is a pretty he's going to be way too modest like he always is, but he's pretty heady into the camera space, so he could probably speak to the optics and the light bleed better. But I suspect anytime you have light bleed, no matter how powerful the processor is, yes, you could do a lot to correct it, as good as something with really good glass. Well, what do you think, Walt?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think, look, they've come a long way with making the glass in the limited amount of architectural space they sort of have there, you know, pretty darn good, considering. But, you know, anybody who's played with any SLRs and, you know, has a you know, bucket full of lenses going back how many years, it's kind of hard to beat the optics on these things. And it's only, you know, until you stare at the photos sort of at great length that you see that, you know, the optics are kind of a limiting factor and all that. So I could see them making the notch, you know, smaller, more compact over time. Hard to imagine that they could totally get rid of that whole optical problem without something having to get stuck on the phone or whatever. I mean, it just seems to me that you're going to have a size issue there that's going to prevent it from totally going away. But maybe it gets smaller, more compact over time. I don't know.
I agree with that latter part, but I think what Bryan is getting at is kind of more of a software issue, meaning like, look at the photo, the portrait mode, right? You don't have the optics of an SLR, but software is able to kind of recreate that through software. So at some point, the light bleed that when you're literally have a lens behind the, it could somehow compensate for that in software and get it. And I think the answer to that is, as good as portrait mode is, it's not as good as actually doing the bokeh effect on a real good, nice piece of glass.
No, I think that's right. I think it'll get better over time, but I'm just not sure you're going to overcome all those glass issues over time. And software, I do all sorts of manipulation with software in my photos too, but still don't think, and maybe I'm just more of a purist and people are getting away from sort of purist photography nowadays, but I just don't think software always cures all the ills right there. So, you know, it is what it is. I mean, there's all these companies out there that make overlays of glass that come onto your iPhone. It's something. I mean, I guess there's a theory that glass enhances sort of magnification and all that kind of stuff. But, I mean, you know, we'll see. I just, you know, as a general matter, though, I just think the notch, I think, you know, some of us might have an UGG factor when they first see it in use. But I just don't think it's going to be that big of a deal.
The reason why people are reacting to it is because it truly looks different. And
right.
because
it's also not edge to edge. People say, well, edge to edge, but it's not, right? They'll look at that and they'll say, well, real estate that's gone right there, right? But
okay, fair enough. And going back to putting the camera underneath the display and using processing power to filter out the interference from having that display, it is the selfie camera, and by definition we expect less from our selfie cameras currently, and that may give Apple room to eventually even remove the notch.
That's true. So that's a good point, but and maybe the other optics and sensors don't need to be as accurate as the selfie camera. So that's a good point. So that's one potential solution. The second one is literally a pop-up camera, right? Where when you go to take it, kind of off the bezel, right, pops up some camera mass to take a photo. And I'm not sure that Apple would like that design. It introduces moving parts, which also is probably not one of their preferred things. That said, there is something about that would be cool about the mechanical version of that kind of pop-up. I would almost like it on the rear as well as the front, in that I wish there's so many people that are using these kind of like Apple stickers that you get off of an Apple to cover their camera, or they're buying fancy versions of it to cover their cameras, that, at a certain point, do the manufacturers notice this and start giving us a physical, on-off with the cameras and mics and stuff, where you can actually slide a door, or by depressing it into the bezel, it's clear it's not videoing anything, and there might be advantage to that. So maybe it's not as crazy as it sounds, but if you want that bezel-less design, there aren't too many physical options. There's under the glass, there's having some kind of notch or cutout, and then there's a pop-up, potentially a mechanism, and not much else. So if you go with the premise that the pop-up camera and kind of through the display is not as good as having some kind of cutout, well, then you have to have some kind of cutout, or you're giving back bigger bezel. And this notion, I see a lot of news outlets say, well, you could just put everything up at the tiny top of the bezel and then wasted basically the edges. And I'm like, well, all right, well, then there'd be another group of people complaining that it's not truly and fully bezel-less anyway, right? So
yeah, it's really, I mean, they're never gonna do a pop-up, because that's a physical component that can break, right? No one's gonna go back to that. That would be a step backwards in terms of reliability and repairability and maintenance and that sort of thing. So really, the only option is camera under the glass and all the problems that come along with that, or something like a notch.
Right.
Or not bezel-less. It's pretty trinary.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess to add to that a little bit, there are a couple of aftermarket products that exist now, right, where you can Lightning connect in sort of a separate camera attachment, right? Kind of cool, kind of a niche product. Hasn't been a big seller, right? I mean, even the super photo folks out there, the reviews on them are mixed. Some of them.
I think Walt cut out for a sec. I don't know what's going on with him. Can you still hear me, Brian?
I can.
All right. Hopefully Walt will join us back in. Oh, there he is.
I'm back. Sorry. Internet connectivity issues. Sorry. I was just saying that there's a bunch of niche products out there that haven't sold terribly well, right? Of add-ons, right? Not a flip out necessarily device, but an add-on. Interesting, but I agree with Brian. I just don't see that largely going to want to do something like that. But it would address sort of the quasi semi-pro or amateurish photographers who want to get a little bit better optics on the whole thing.
Here's another problem I have with the whole notch debate and the people that don't like it. The people that purport to have such great taste that this is such an offense to them, I find to have really shitty taste. So fuck them. And moreover, it's one of these, I'm getting as much physical real estate on the front of this phone as possible. And the notch allows you to do that. It otherwise would waste those two little rabbit ears where you could put in at least the status information. And when you really boil down a bunch of these assholes' problems with this, they're like, well, I wish that was in black so it looked like there was extra bezel basically on the screen, like a little bit thicker bezel up top. And I'm like, all right, princess, get a background where that top part is black, and go to town. And then there's,
you know what, that's probably going to be a thing. Or
I think
backgrounds that mask out the notch.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it was a bad design that all these guys are complaining about. And there are some legitimate things that may come up, and we'll see how the phone works in practice. But it's one of these, you can't complain until the fucking thing comes. Well, that's not true. I complain about all kinds of shit before it comes out. But
I was going to say
it's completely different when I do it.
Pot meat kettle.
Yeah. But you should at least give the software a try, because I could see, like compensating. What's the best way to compensate for the notch when you're looking at a web page in landscape and maybe it's cutting out some things? I have one theory. Oh, you could turn the fucking phone around. I mean, I know that's crazy talk and shit. Then you would see that part, and the notch would cover another part of it. But yeah, do they buffer that and have some buffer space or not? But whatever, that can be tweaked out. What you could always tweak and fix the software. You can't magically create more screen space later, right? So the idea of maximizing screen space is the right way to go. And I do agree with the both of you that this is one of those things in practice you're just not going to see after a while, and it's just going to be a bunch of bullshit noise. But just kind of metaphysically, fuck all the people that are complaining about it. I don't. I guess there isn't too much more on the notch, unless you guys have something.
No, this is what's going to happen on the notch. First of all, I'm deleting my mistaken tweet here for this very live stream. What's going to happen is we're going to have some people complaining about it for a couple of days publicly on the interwebs, and within 2 weeks, everyone will have forgotten about it.
Yeah, that's much the normal case for all this. And by the way, another I told you so with regard to, oh, there's not going to be nearly enough iPhone 10s, and the sky is falling per our last podcast. And yeah, the sellout was kind of as fast as all the previous iPhone, and the delays reported are roughly on par with the iPhone 7s. You know, the 5-6 week delays seem to be the longest. So we're not getting 13-15 week delays like as would be anticipated by some of those sky or falling bullshit articles. Now, it's still early. Maybe things turn to shit. But so far it's kind of tracking with the traditional iPhone launch. So it's another, a lot of parasites make their living on just Apple noise, and creating more noise gets them $3 more of ad revenue clicks. So they write bullshit. Anyway, all right. So we're generally all meh or pro on the notch.
Well, it's not about being pro notch. I mean, in some sort of magical world where physics were different, the notch wouldn't exist. But it's a necessary evil, and I'm way the human brain works. We'll all adjust to it quickly.
Well,
but that's not pro notch.
Well,
it's just not anti notch.
I think it's pro notch. Hear me out on this. If you had your choice, knowing what the other three, the tri-state options here were, would you have chosen to have extra bezel basically instead of the notch?
Yeah, bezel up top.
You would have preferred that.
Yeah.
Oh, really? That's interesting. So you are anti-notch.
I accept it. I accept the notch. I don't. There's no magical like oh my God, it's bezel-less. That's finally it's like I don't really care about bezel-less except for going as bezel-less as Apple can is great. And this will be great. I got a bigger screen and a smaller phone, and that's fantastic. But I would have taken bezel at the top over the notch.
Really? That's interesting. I would not. I would. I like the compactness of this. So once again, I will be proven right.
You will be proven right on what it is that I would rather have had.
That's right. Because that's I've said something.
That is
like first time that I've said something, you've shit on
a new level
back and said I actually was right.
Yeah, well, that you proclaiming that you're going to be right over what it is that I want is
all I can say is
astounding, even for you.
Sorry, Bryan, but I'm surprised you're surprised over this. But anyway, I mean, you've known him long enough.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point. And it's not like I've already said I accept the notch. So what the hell are you crowing about, man?
You're anti-notch. You're like, I prefer more bezel. That's what you said.
No, you asked me if I could have the choice of what it was that I would want, which one would I have taken. I told you which one I would have taken, but I'm fine with the choice that Apple made.
More bezel is the opposite of having the notch.
Yeah, but I'm not anti-notch. I'm fine with that choice.
Whatever. You're going to come back and say the notch is the right way to go.
Oh yeah, the notch. Oh man, the notch is the greatest thing that's ever happened in my life. I can't wait to prove you right with that, John. Man, thank God this notch is here. Boy, this phone would have been a pile of crap if it hadn't had the notch.
I don't hear you reacting to the toaster fridge, Mr. Screen Toucher, Mr. Talk down shit to Dr. Mac when he says I like touching the screen. You and Jeff shit on him like he was the fucking biggest retard on earth. Out of hand dismissed his stuff. You should go back and listen to that podcast, how rude you were to him. And then a few episodes later, after I've been saying all this time, toaster fridge is that, you're like, I touched the screen, toaster fridge is where it's at. So it's a very smug thing from people that come back from this shit. Like, very interesting selective memory.
I am sure that I, of course, am the only one with selective memory, and that your memory is all encompassing. And in no way whatsoever do you ever leave out the things where you were blisteringly wrong about everything.
No, it's not true. You come back on almost everything I've said. You just hate it. You love mocking me, which I understand. Listen, mocking other people is like, don't feed me, man. That's awesome entertainment. But it doesn't change the fact that it's true, that almost everything I've said is proven to be right, and that you were against, and you've like begrudgingly are like, yeah, that was probably right. Anyway,
are you still talking?
Let's not belabor all the shows. It would take too long. So let's move on to the next topic of iWorks and iLife being dead. I guess
iLife's not dead.
All right.
GarageBand got an update today.
I didn't look at the details of it. Was it a substantial upgrade, or is it one of these like, we got 3 tweaks? It's kind of a nice little, it's still alive, but it's not.
Let me tell you what's in it so you can decide. Or actually, let me tell you what's in it so that you can tell me what it is that I will think. Then, because that I would really like to know. First, it got a sequencer, which is like a drum machine, or a drum machine is a kind of sequencer.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's pretty simple to use. It definitely goes back to some very, very classic, tried and true, old school interface elements for it, but it looks good. It also comes with the new sound library, so you can basically download Apple loops and instrument sounds. And that includes, I believe it includes, Apple wasn't explicit about this, but I believe that it includes new packs. Right, so there will be new loop content coming out, I believe, and Apple hasn't really released a bunch of new loops in a while, so I'm excited to see that train rolling again. And then it includes new instruments as well, the touch instruments that Apple introduced about a year ago or so. So you've got 3 fairly you've got a great feature, a fairly significant feature, the sound library, in my opinion. And then you've got a nice addition of having additional instruments.
So maybe I'm misunderstanding the sound library part. Is the sound library just new loops, or is it like kind of a new software infrastructure for dealing with loops and stuff?
Both.
Okay. Well, then yeah.
And but it's only for the iOS version. At least as of this recording, it has not been rolled out on the Mac.
Okay, that's pathetic. But. So I'm sorry. When I'm speaking to iLife and iWork, I really don't give a fuck about the iOS versions of them. I'm talking about the Mac versions of them and the death of that. I will defer to Bryan, to your far greater expertise on probably the iOS versions of these, because I just don't care. It's a joke to use them, in my opinion, so far. But on the Mac side, I haven't. So anyway, if they bring those to the Mac. I do think that those are pretty substantial for GarageBand. So that's nice to see that someone's working on them.
It is nice to see. That's the thing. Right? We got a Logic update earlier this year, and then Apple released a press release for that, which I found weird. But they also released a press release for this version, and this version didn't bother me as much. That they released a press release for it. My point is that when you look at everything that was announced and has shipped since WWDC, and you see a fairly significant update to GarageBand for iOS come out too, this gives me a lot of hope that Apple is that what we saw at WWDC was not the blip. That the blip will end up being 2016 and not 2017
and 2015.
2015 was better than 2016
and 2014. All right. So it may, what, I like your optimism, and I hope you're right on those accounts. To me, but I'd like to switch over to talking on the Mac side, because that they're updating this on iOS, I just don't care. For real productivity, for real heavy lifting work, that professionals might do, It's still about
you want to see updates in iWork.
In iWork, correct?
Right. I was. So my only point was that iLife, it does not appear to be dead. iLife has been updated. iMovie's been updated, and GarageBand has been updated. The DVD stuff, of course, is long gone. But iWork, on the other hand, something that you've been on accurately for a long time, has been sadly and sorely neglected.
So let me put it a little. Thank you. Let me put it a little in context of just how much of a shit show this is. I think that Pages is way over 10 years old at this point. In 10 years, Apple has been incapable of adding really remedial word processing features like line numbers, paragraph numbers,
which is something you need for your profession.
Table of contents. Not just me. I mean, table of contents. I mean, almost anyone. You know, if you're doing a thesis, you need a table of contents, right? If you're just a grad student doing your thesis, you need a table of contents. Like it's remedial shit. And to have not been incorporating, and I'm not talking, I get that Apple doesn't need to compete with Microsoft Word and reach feature parity with that, even though like open offices everywhere have. But on the other hand, it shouldn't maintain feature parity with Mac Write. Right? Microsoft Word, then fucking Write after 10 fucking years. Object-oriented program. Object-oriented program. I didn't do that much of a hit. Anyway, but with object-oriented programming making all this easier, that the parity after 10 years should be much closer to Microsoft Office. And yeah, I mean, Microsoft Office in some sense is its own, Microsoft Word is its own operating system, and not everyone needs that kind of depth, and if they do, that's a perfectly reasonable thing for someone to go buy. But I mean, there's basic shit, and what's worse is, I think it was iWorks 09 when Pages regressed, right? They came out with a new version and it still hasn't met feature parity just with the previous 09 version, which is pathetic. So it's beyond an embarrassment that Apple is incapable of keeping this even remotely modern. They just don't care.
So what? Yeah, what I think is the issue, and I don't have direct evidence of this, but what I think is the issue is that Apple doesn't have a dedicated iWorks team, and instead, or for that matter, an iLife team, and instead they've got these dynamite developers who get put where they're needed because Apple has got this obsession with operating as lean as a startup. And the problem is that what that results in is that you get these bread and butter products that we would like to see updated. They get neglected for the big picture stuff that's being worked on.
So that may be true, but I think it's not, because Brian, they've hired the roles are now 4 or 5 times the size of that they were during the Steve Jobs era, 2010. And
yeah, but they're doing other stuff, man.
Yeah.
Apple isn't hiring a dedicated team for iWork.
So
rightly or wrongly, and I would say wrongly, Apple doesn't seem to be hiring a dedicated team for iWork.
Well, that may be the case, but what are all these hires doing? Picking their fucking noses?
No, man, they're working on the AR stuff. They're working on the medical stuff. They're working on the Apple Watch stuff. They're working on the medical infrastructure stuff. They're working on the car. They're working on all the big picture stuff that I've argued all along is what Tim is focused on.
So if those new hires are working on all that leaves those old hires to be able to work on the stuff that...
No, they're still being ported around from Mac OS to iOS and back and forth.
Well, in 2010, they were able to update Mac OS. They were able to update iOS. They were able to create new iPods and the software there. They were able to iterate all those things, plus iWorks in 2009 and 10.
Maps came out in 2010.
By the way, introduced the iPad. So they were able to do all that with a lot less people back then. So what's the excuse for not continuing on that same pace that they...
Well, yeah, there's no... I won't defend it. There is no excuse. And I, in my opinion, there's a limit to, in my opinion, I mean, like I've ever run a company like Apple. But there's a limit to the benefits of running lean all the time. I mean, iWork needs a dedicated team, and they need to come out with updates every year. And the same thing with GarageBand.
So I've mentioned this.
And Logic.
And I've mentioned this.
Final Cut Pro. Sorry.
Yep. Last episode. And this is a failure of Tim Cook's, and no one's holding his ass to the fire, and everyone should, which is part of his job. It was, not letting Apple die after Steve Jobs died. And he's been successful in that part. But part of it is also figuring out what's a good infrastructure for Apple to move forward. And I think he's failed on that. And what's worse is that he's had some solutions to this staring him in his face. And a great one of those was FileMaker. It's spun out, runs like its own little thing. The people there are focused on making FileMaker continue to increment and grow. And you could do something very similar with the iWorks team and a lot of these other teams that are seeing huge stagnation on the product side. So making an infrastructure where things that they frankly don't care about as much. They don't care about the Mac. They don't care about this productivity software and professional software, which is fine. They want to, follow the periwinkle butterflies of their fancy. Let them, but establish a team that does care about that stuff and let them progress. They can do great things if you give people some freedom to do that. You don't care, but you're also basically strangling those products from doing really cool things that some people that did care about.
And those products do bring value to the ecosystem.
Well, and they bring value. I shared with you in the tech group. I don't know if you saw those, but it was from a lawyers group where they were mocking how bad and how pathetic Pages were, and the fact that some of them were still holding on to the Pages 09 version because it was still better. And what a joke Apple is, even in that professional realm. We're always thinking about the video professionals who, Apple has basically admitted we just fucked our own asses beyond belief in not making a Mac Pro and ignoring that market, and huge swaths of it going away. I can tell you huge swaths of that have gone away because they couldn't wait for these products and niches that were ignored. But it's the same in a bunch of these other niches. You can't just ignore these areas and think that people won't notice and see it's a joke.
Yeah, I just don't see them changing any of this. I mean, I think to your point, John, I don't think they care. I think they've just sort of ceded this whole area to Microsoft Office and Open Office, which, Open Office wasn't even a player a couple of years ago, right? And now it's pretty centered to what kids are using, professionals are using all over the place. I just don't think they care. They just don't see this as a place that they're going to make an impact, and they're not going to do it, regardless of whatever impact it has on the whole sort of ecosystem. Just people aren't using it, I think, as well as part of the problem. GarageBand, maybe they care a little bit more about for whatever reason, because they care more about the music space, I think, than they do in some of these other areas.
Well, iTunes.
I'm wrong, by the way, but I don't think I am.
iTunes proves you wrong, because if they gave a shit, they wouldn't have that husking.
Well, there's that.
It's the default.
There's that.
By the way, it's interesting. A company that mocked toaster fridges uses iTunes as a mechanism to transfer photos from your iPhone into your Photos app. Think about that. Tim Cook had the fucking balls to come up and mock toaster fridges when his music program is what you use to transfer fucking photos to your photo program off your iPhone.
You're welcome.
I mean, it's just fucking ridiculous.
That's not confusing at all.
No, it's not confusing at all. And it just shows how little they give a shit. And the problem is, it reminds me a bit of very much of the Scully era, where they knew better, and they sure didn't give a shit about whatever they didn't give a shit about. And it's the kind of thing that if enough of that core group goes away, bad things can happen. Maybe it's a world where only the iPhone matters, and they continue on, and kind of the creators and professionals that use this no longer matter as influencers. That's an interesting bet. It's a pretty risky bet, and you wonder why make it when just serving these people ensures that you don't have to risk it. And two, there's plenty of money to be made. Yeah, maybe it's a rounding error to you, but it's still a very reasonable, sizable business. Why wouldn't you? Other people would love to have those businesses. So it's just kind of, I see it as a real abdication of responsibility on the part of the management and really misfiring on the management. Yeah, I mean, Rick is pointing out that pros matter because they develop the apps for iOS. That's very true too. But I think there's lots of things that Apple potentially misses because of the wonder of kind of the professional and the hackers and the tinkerers and the misfits, that they do cool things that you are surprised by. Luckily, augmented reality hasn't hit yet, but there was a period of a couple of years where you couldn't do shit with augmented reality on the Mac, and you can barely do it with the very latest iMacs now. And who knows what wonderful things they come up. Maybe that ends up being a goose egg, but the point is, why wouldn't you want to be part of that? If you're an intellectually interested person at advancing humanity with cool technology, which is the way I always looked at Apple. It's not about any particular product. It's about what cool things can we do to make people better and happier and stuff like that. And abdicating interesting parts of that just seems counter to the ethos, at least in my mind, but it might be just only in my mind. Bryan clearly agrees with everything I said, so we'll just move on. Anyway, if you guys got nothing else on, I guess the sum total of the iWorks thing is they just haven't been updating it. I guess here's a reasonable question. Do you guys think that they're going to start up on this? Maybe they'll surprise us in half a year and suddenly start.
They've certainly lowered expectations low enough that any update would be right. Yay! It's the dentist theory of life. It's not that bad.
Bryan, you're on mute.
I am.
Or he's lost
my thesis, if my thesis is correct, and Apple learned its lesson from 2016, learned that it turns out that if you want people to buy your products, you should probably make new versions of them. If they've learned their lesson on that, and what we've seen in 2017 is going to continue, Apple could surprise us in 2017 with some updates to iWork.
That would be fantastic.
2018, you mean?
2018, thank you. It could happen. I'm not holding my breath on it, but I'm certainly pleased to be seeing an update to GarageBand.
So just so we kind of have the similar nomenclature, this is what I would say is a real product update, like a real feature update, not kind of like these minor bug fixy, let's make it compatible with the new operating system updates. I don't think that the Logic was a major update. That maybe there's the new 10 Final Cut, also the updates up until now. I think there's a 10.4 or something coming out, so maybe that is more substantial. I don't know about it. And all the previous GarageBand updates weren't. But this last GarageBand update that you mentioned, with those are real new features. Those are kind of
the Logic update had some significant features too.
All right, I'll defer to you since you use it way more than me. So all right, so maybe they've had two, but like it's got to be some real features, not one of these another reboot Spider-Man 3. Let's retell this story with less features versions that they've been doing over time. I'm curious to see if they have a real update. But I like your optimism, Bryan. So it always makes me feel better when I your optimistic version.
Yeah, again, low bars.
Yeah, that's true.
Right, really low bars, right?
I like Rick. Unfortunately, is probably more on my page with his comments. But anyway,
not gonna happen.
All right. So
Rick says that he'll bet dinner that there's not a major update to iWork.
Yeah. 2018 will be an interesting year to see how serious they are on the side on a whole number of levels.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll tell you how long it's been. It's been so long that I think a lot of new users don't even know what iLife and iWorks means. What is that?
Yeah.
What are those terms? That's like a term from how many years ago, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Because they just spit out They spit out .revs of each of these pieces of software, and they really sell it as a package so much. But
referred to now as the individual, it's Pages, it's Keynote, it's Numbers, it's GarageBand, it's iMovie.
Yeah, and again, if you look at those programs and you think, I can't think of a million ways to improve them beyond like just some feature parity is beyond low hanging fruit, but there's a new type of a lot of presentation software where I forget the name of the product. It's a web-based one where you basically have an infinite whiteboard, and you zoom into a part of the presentation, and you could zoom in and further, and then zoom back out and go to another area of it. And it's a very commonly worked presentation style now. I've seen in a lot of presentations use this. Apple's got nothing on that. I mean, these are just, and they certainly have the infrastructure for it. Like a lot of the core technologies would make that super easy and interesting. But again, there's no spark of anybody giving a darn there. I wonder internally if the culture is like, if you work on that, you're a loser. You're not one of the cool people at Apple that are working on the really interesting things.
It's not one of the key projects, right? Yeah.
I would imagine there's a lot to that, and I can't imagine how you would combat that as management. Well, because it's true.
Well, it's only as true as you believe it. I mean, it's part of the bad culture. But if I got to work, I don't know. Like if I remember when I was starting out, and believe it or not, there was a time when I did coding and programming. If I got to work on a project like that, just doing like a
punch cards, or what was that again, John?
Yeah, it was almost back then.
Stacks of cards.
But it was awesome. I'm like, oh man, I got to do a part of that project. That's something that touches everybody's lives. I don't know. If you can't sell and romanticize that, that's on you, because that kind of wonder is there for a lot of developers and programmers that get to touch on that. And if you've gotten that jaded, get the fuck out and let someone else that's not that jaded in, because you're dead inside, and that's kind of your problem. But I think it's more of a problem with management, allowing that to be the case, to develop that way.
All right, fair enough. That's a good point.
Anyway, let's get on to
more exciting topics.
The dead.
So, and we're not talking about iLife and iWork anymore. Close. Yeah,
well, they're Walking Dead as well, right?
Right, exactly.
So, while I'll come out and I'm going to come out with a major, I guess, announcement here, is that I am a big zombie fan. I'm in general a fan of anything apocalyptic for some reason. When most of humanity dies, if not all of humanity dies, and it's a form of entertainment, I find that to be a wonderful form of entertainment. It draws me in. There's an asteroid killing all of humanity. There's an earthquake eating us all. There's apocalyptic weather. But zombies in particular, I love it. I love when everyone else is dead. And then you get the pleasure of
it's you against the world. That's why you like it. It's that, and you get to kill everybody without any remorse, guilt, or shame. That's why you like this crap.
Absolutely, I think that is spot on. And not only do I get no remorse or hesitation about it, I get to feel good about myself for killing these zombie bastards.
You're being a good guy.
That's why any.
Wow, it sounds like you're not a fan, Brian. Though it sounds like you're not. I mean, come on, team building parts of this, or the all for one for all for one kind of stuff, all that kind of good stuff. No,
I'm a Walking Dead fan. I'm a fan of that show, but I'm only at the beginning of season 2, so I'm a little bit behind.
Oh, I see.
I'm a little bit behind. But the reason why I'm a little bit behind is because to stage what is it? Stage left this way, right? There's my TV, and most of the TV watching I do, I'm actually sitting at my desk, and if I'm sitting at my desk, I'm probably on my Mac, which means I'm multitasking, which means I'm not really paying attention to the TV. Most of the time, if I'm doing that, I'd rather watch something I don't care about. Walking Dead is a show you need to pay attention to. So I end up not watching it because it's too good.
Yeah.
This is so funny because Walt and I have had this same conversation, which is we have at least two categories of shows. There are the shit shows that we don't mind multitasking with because it's part of my attention is all I need, and then there's the shows that are I need to focus. I need to have the right ambiance.
Right, exactly.
To enjoy
political nonsense shows are in that former category. That crap can play in the background all day, whatever, right? But Game of Thrones, Walking Dead, you got to pay attention. There's a lot of character stuff going on in these shows.
Game of Thrones is so complicated that it's a show that I do pay attention to, and I can't keep it straight.
Right.
The twist,
right, exactly.
No end. Also has zombies in it. So what's the topic about? It's not about any particular show. Walt, actually, this sickness started with me, and apparently I have infected Walt, which is fuck all these shows that can't, they have all this money and all this time and attention. Can't they pay attention a little bit to the zombie physics in the show? And what do I mean by zombie physics? Like, look,
because of course the science in the show is totally accurate, right? There's no question of the accuracy of the genesis of zombies and the, not needing to eat anything for a couple of years, all that kind of stuff, right?
So first, there is a type of there are several things in the wild that have zombie-like beyond rabies, which will affect a person's mind basically to go like a festering animal and bite people, literally have a desire to bite people. There are ants that get particular funguses that go into their brains and make them walk around zombie-like and try to infect the nest. To produce more spores. So there are analogs in nature like that. So, but beyond, I agree with you. Look, it's like all good science fiction. We suspend disbelief for some given criteria, but then don't get too sloppy. Like, okay, we're going to go with you that somehow zombies exist, right? Somehow there are these perpetual energized bunnies that never run out of fuel. But then with that, keep it somewhat realistic. So here's a good for instance. This part drives me nuts in every zombie show. After I get the first time you encounter a zombie, it's fucked up. But after you've been around surviving in the wild and whatnot, and you notice zombies seem to like fire. Why the fuck are you going attacking and starting shit with zombies? Every time, any interaction you go and like, oh, I need some supplies. There might be zombies in the store. The solution is don't creep into the store where zombies may be laying. And there's always that one sleeping zombie, right? What is it with this one fucking lazy zombie that's always like dead on the ground? And you're like, oh, he's completely dead. And I'm still going to creep in. And then when I step on him, all of a sudden he's like, oh, that was a good nap. Now it's time to eat your brain.
He's sleepy and he's silent and he's stealth completely.
Right.
It's amazing.
The one sleepy fuck zombie that's always there. But beyond that, like, there might be creepy zombies. Just start a bonfire, like, I don't know, half a mile away. The zombies in that area will see it. And apparently they like it so much, they throw themselves on it and burn themselves. This seems to be a problem that solves itself. Or anywhere else you run in, there's a lot of zombies. If you've got a buddy, have them go over someplace and ring a bell really loud and have all the zombies, like, go away there. And so there's these basic things that they're like, no, even though I've killed 1 million zombies and been attacked by 1 million zombies, I will continue to act in the most stupid way possible. Here's another thing. You've learned that anytime you shoot a fucking gun, zombies come after you. So maybe
silencers, maybe.
Or how about the samurai sword? It's clearly got infinite ammo. It's always with you.
Yeah, Michonne got that right? But that's it, right? Only Michonne can use a samurai sword.
But you would look and say, hey, Michelle, that's a great idea. I don't know why I didn't think of it. Everyone should have a fucking samurai sword. Oh, fuck that. I need a special club that shows my individual personality.
Listen, it goes part and parcel with everybody needing to wear tank tops and things that don't protect your neck. Because, you want to be comfortable when you're in the afterlife there, right? And, like, you don't want to protect your neck because the zombies never go there, right? They never bite you there.
If I'm a chick during a zombie apocalypse, what I want to dress like is Lara Croft from Tomb Raider with a cut-off tank top and short. Because having as much exposed skin as possible during a zombie apocalypse is really cool. Why would I wear elbow pads and shoulder pads and fucking leather jacket?
Crazy.
No. I feel like I need to be unrestricted when I'm going around zombies. That's it's time to be very comfortable.
It's apparently one area that Mad Max got it right, and I think Game of the Walking Dead could learn from the Mad Max movies, where some spikes on your shoulders may not be such a bad idea. Just a hunch.
Let me turn this around. So the rant is funny, and I get it. So let me turn this around on you. You're a showrunner or a writer on the show, a zombie show, and the mythology, the canon establishes that zombies are attracted to fire enough so that they will end up killing themselves. So the obvious thing for your characters to do from a logical standpoint is to start building fires, as you said, right?
Right.
How do you make the show interesting after that? What happens?
Well, they've had some episodes where they actually do that. I don't want to spoil it for you, but there are some episodes later on where they light some huge fires and suddenly all the zombies throw themselves at the fire and everybody's saved. You're like, wait, hold on, time out. We've had seasons after season of this, and they've now just discovered that these things like fire, and they could have saved a gazillion people if they had just tried that before.
Okay, let's say for the zombies, it's a scary time. People are on edge. I get it. But okay, it took them years to figure out. Once you figure this out, why would you not be doing this ad infinitum? And to you,
and they never repeat it. It's happened a couple seasons ago, right? And they've never repeated that tact of lighting up a zombie. Like,
there's another.
We're moving on.
So, a couple of things that have become clearly obvious: zombies don't swim. Zombies can't duck. If you were to tie little ropes, little wire ropes everywhere, zombies can't duck. They would just walk and chop their own heads off. There's just so many of these basics, and to your point, why it would still be entertaining. There's a show. It's weird. It's called Z Nation. It's another zombie show, but it's more
slightly low budget, just a touch.
Oh my god, it's really low budget, but it's very campy. But in some ways, the zombie physics there are more real. And I'll give a couple of spoilers, but they have realized Walt had this great idea. We're always like, hey, how do we survive the zombie apocalypse and live well, right? So Walt's like, well, you got to have a house that's on the edge of a cliff. And in this house, you have a bell that gets everyone into a narrow corridor, right? And at the end of the corridor, you just have a hole that falls off a cliff. And these bastards just fall and just plop on it, and it's problem solved. You were just funneling millions of zombies to their death, right?
And then Z Nation ran that idea like the following year. I was like, hey, they stole our idea, but it was perfect. It was perfect.
So, and then Z Nation had another episode where they ripped off another good zombie movie, which was Shaun of the Dead, which was a goofy kind of like comedy version of zombies. But they realized, well, zombies are perpetual motion machines. So just put a zombie on a treadmill with like a brain in a jar, and this thing's going to be walking, trying to get this thing, powering whatever you want. And Z Nation, remember that they did that too, where they had
they had treadmills or whatever. They were drilling for water and all that stuff, right? Walking in circles forever, right?
So that shows that there's plenty of mirth to be had with good, honest.
Well, even Michonne, if you remember early on in Walking Dead, she cuts off their jaws, and they suddenly become docile creatures, right? They're totally docile and usable for all sorts of things. And that they said it was interesting for one season. I guess it didn't sell, so they move on. I go, but wait, this kind of works, right? Apparently. So anyway, they just sort of abandoned it. My other favorite, though, John, it's always my pet peeve too, is that they kind of avoid this couple little issues in these shows. One is, I know last time we had a blackout here in New York and New Jersey, within 100 miles could pump gas. Power's out, gas is out. Goodbye. Yeah, at any given moment, they're driving vehicles freely on the highway at high speed, by the way, with no other cars apparently around and no obstacles, even though billions of people have died and left cars everywhere. But they pull up to any gas station, fill up as if that thing would work. And by the way, last time I checked my snowblower, gas goes bad in like 3 to 6 months. Gas, and this show is now how many years old, right? None of that gas is working. There is no movement anywhere with these vehicles at this point, right? So there's things you could do. Diesel might survive. Other things might survive. There's stuff you could do with that. They kind of ignore that. You just steal a car, drive around wherever you want. And by the way, don't worry about driving 70 miles an hour on a highway. Not a problem. Completely unrealistic. But anyway, they could do stuff with that theme, though, Brian, is what I'm sort of getting at in all of this. Like, you're now several seasons in. I guess that shows in the South, but what about in the North? You would think these things freeze, they die. Maybe you want to move up there. Maybe you want to try some other things than just sort of wait around and slashing. And by the way, limitless bullets, apparently. I love that. I mean, these guys just keep shooting guns as if there's 18,000 bullets on their back. And they run around because that's the best way, apparently. Shooting a gun doesn't attract 8,000 other freaking zombies within 20 miles. Doesn't happen. But anyway, they continue the same theme. I see the point that, you want to sort of change the themes here and there. to sell, God knows the ratings on the show are phenomenal, so they probably don't need to do much more to get more people to watch. But there's a lot more they could do, especially the show is so many years into it. And some of this recurring stuff is just, it's getting a little silly, I think. But those are just, whatever, a couple of my pet peeves on top of it all.
Well, I think to answer Brian's question is, surviving in a real, let's talk about oxymoronic, realistic questions of survival that long without kind of the accoutrements of civilization is interesting, right? And actually solving the problem. If you had these zombie things, like, yeah, hooking up wires that they decapitate themselves would be hilarious. Yeah, I don't want to spoil some things for Brian.
Listen, I am far enough behind that any spoilage is on me at this point.
Well, no, it's interesting when you see it. And they're good moments. But the point is, let me put it in a higher way. The few times there were realistic zombie physics that were put forth in the show, they had phenomenal response from the fans, because the fans are like, finally, you finally did something that was completely moronically stupid. Right. I want to know, when every zombie movie is like, as soon as you get zombies, you're like, everyone needs a samurai sword. This is very clear. Like,
right. Well, and to their credit, they have tried. I mean, everybody's always talked about, wouldn't you just all get on a boat? You'd get on a boat and forget all this stuff, right? You got a desalinization thing, and you could fish forever, whatever, right? They tried that with the offshoot of The Walking Dead. It didn't exactly work out so well on that boat, but somehow, that is something that a lot of fans cried about for years, saying, come on, you got like a gazillion of these huge craft lying around. Isn't that kind of the first thing you would do? And to your point, I think you've said this to me a couple of times. What happened to like our Navy, where they have these nuclear subs and stuff, where these guys could live underwater for like a year at a time? Like, all that apparently got zombified immediately also, I guess. Like every soldier, I do love how every military in every one of these shows falls in 24 to 72 hours, I think, something you've mentioned. Everyone.
Right. The militaries of all the world fall within like 10 minutes. But yet these 12 dudes are totally like surviving for infinity time with their pokey sticks. And but here's the question. Yeah. So I'm cool. Look, either like the guys in the sub survived and they're cool, in which case, isn't it interesting what they're up to? Like, are they planning to dominate the world? They've got a nuke, right? Or they've all turned to zombies, in which case you have a free floating submarine that is nuclear powered with nukes in it, that is floating around the ocean. That's an interesting
topic. Not one, but couple hundred.
Right. This is also an interesting topic, and I would be curious what would happen. I would imagine explosions in the ocean might occur. I don't know. But something interesting would happen with this. And I'm just saying, just a little bit more paying attention to the details of the zombie physics would be good. It was the criticism, I think, came from one of the stars of, I think it was Walking Dead, Walt, you mentioned, was like, people get way too into this. They're like, way too. I'm like, well, one, you should be grateful. Two, look, if you just get rid of all sense of reality, all these things become LSD trips, right? Like, we're not just suspending our belief that zombies can exist, but I have laser power coming out of my ass, and when I do a fart thing with this, it teleports me, and I get 3 wishes and alternative Wednesdays that make reality upside. Whatever. The shows can become totally ridiculous when you just say, well, we don't care about any of this attention to detail. It all goes to shit. So there's some balance of making. I think I'm curious, since you're a sci-fi writer, what is your feel? I'll tell you what mine is, and I'm curious what your thoughts on this are, Brian. In science fiction, you give a premise of, here's where you might have to suspend disbelief, or here, let's assume this premise is true, that teleportation becomes real, that faster than light travel becomes real, so whatever it is, the time travel becomes real through a magic flux capacitor, right? Or whatever it is that we come up with. And now you're showing, isn't it interesting, and what would life be like that as a consequence of this, trying to keep reality bound to that fiction versus just, it doesn't matter. So I'm a believer of, you give a premise, here's what we understand, that time travel exists or zombies exist or whatever, and then you try to keep it as realistic as possible. Obviously, you're going to make mistakes at times, but hopefully, and that is what becomes interesting, is what if this happens? What would life be like? So I don't take that criticism from that Walking Dead guy that these people are too serious about it. I'm like, well, you're when you don't pay attention to that, you're taking away from my ability to suspend disbelief and enjoy the world you're trying to create.
In general, storytelling, sci-fi, fantasy, horror, whatever, any kind of storytelling, if you get your reader or watcher to buy into what's happening to your characters, you can pretty much take them wherever you want to. There's always going to be that line, and my personal want would be to keep to hew as closely as what I think makes sense as possible. And and that's going to be a slightly subjective point for everybody. There's plenty of people who just can't stand to watch anything with magic because magic isn't real. Period. End of story. So like, doesn't matter what you do with the story, that person is not going to be interested in what you're doing with that story. And then there's going to be people like the same thing with time travel. I've met plenty of people who just dismiss time travel as impossible, so it's stupid and why bother. I think you get that a lot more with something like magic or even something like zombies, even because you've got the conservation of energy happening. The question with zombies, but so I don't know. The bigger task is, can you get the consumer of your content, can you get them buying into the story about your characters? And if you can, then you can pretty much go where you want to go.
Well, that was kind of a non-answer. So it sounds like, I mean, I guess I agree with you. If you make the character compelling, you can make it as shitty or as good as you want. But I think you see with comic books, right? There are times when people have a beloved character, whether it's Superman or Spider-Man, and there are errors where people take this and the mass of fans really like it for one reason. And then there are low periods where the writing is in an area where the fans don't like it. And I would posit to you that despite them, dragging people along because they're fans and devoted to Spider-Man or Batman or whatever it is, that the low periods are when there's less thoughtfulness with regard to what would a situation like this be. And it doesn't always have to be realistic. I don't think that's the goal, because you sell the premise, right? You sell the audience on the premise of what kind of care you're going to take on this. So, when you watch Batman and you watch the comedic version with, I think it was Adam West, sorry, versus kind of the more real, the grittier versions that came later, you've kind of sold the audience on it. Like this premise is kind of more gleeful and silly, and this premise is a little bit more serious and whatever. But you sell them on the premise, and if you stay true to it, I think people will like it or not. When you just get sloppy and just start treating the audience like you'll buy any schlock I have, I think even though you can take them along, it doesn't mean it's good just because you can sell it.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, I was thinking, you mentioned that, I think you said like the law of thermodynamics, which was another one of our zombie physics pet peeves, which is, and I think, what's interesting about Walking Dead, it could do something that I don't think any other zombie franchise, at least on television or movies, has gotten to, which is, it's been around long enough that it starts to be an issue, which is, look, I'm with the premise that somehow all their cells stay alive and whatever, they need to eat brains and stuff. But at a certain point, like, these things dehydrate, right? Beyond that, blood being a really good carrier of ATP that's requisite for moving muscles and stuff like that. Like, at a certain point, they just become totally dried out husks. And I think in some of the later episodes, we start seeing dead that are totally husks that aren't moving. And doesn't this problem solve itself after X number of years, where, when there's no more fuel for these things, regardless of how robust they are, that they just kind of shrivel up and die? Or do they now somehow, beyond like biology, now that they've broken the laws like of quantum physics and thermodynamics, where they can just without eating anything still, magically sustain themselves forever? And that becomes an interesting question that I hope that they kind of deal with, because this show's gone on. How many years has Walking Dead gone on? Is it like 7 years now, Walt?
I think something like that.
Something like that. It's close.
Yeah.
At a certain point, doesn't this problem solve itself? Is, I guess, the another question for kind of.
I imagine it solves itself when the audience leaves.
Well, so far it's not happening, and I don't think it's going to happen either. So, I mean, there may be.
Well, it will happen eventually. People will tire of the show. I mean, at some point.
Yeah, first episode was actually 7 years ago yesterday, October 31st, 2010.
Wow. Yeah. So that's
7 years.
Pretty long.
Well, since we've been recording this show, by the way, Bitcoin has gone up $120. Just FYI.
That should have been the topic for the day. Anyway.
Yeah. I won't mention. Are you in particular looking for a buyer or sell at the moment?
I unfortunately I was liquid with I was doing a little bit of day trading and I sold at 59.70 with the belief that it was going back down, and eventually got back into it at 65.30, I think. So actually I lost some value day trading, which is always the danger of day trading. Yeah. Picking
I think this is just a general investment kind of concept. To me, it's, you never have to worry about picking the very peak or the very trough of the curves. If you're anywhere near them, within 10% one way or the other, you're going to do great. That's really tough to do on it when your quantum of time is the day.
Yes.
Versus
when I'm not liquid, I don't care. I just it goes up, yay. It's only when I'm liquid and when I'm in cash that I start getting tense with the price. Yeah, especially in a bull market, which is what we're at. I mean, it's the run up in Bitcoin is ridiculous. As massive amounts of capital are coming in.
Are you looking at Ethereum or any of the other alternatives?
Yeah, a little bit. I do faucets. I don't buy Bitcoin per se. So I don't have a lot of any cryptocurrency, but Ethereum is interesting because of the tools that are built into it that facilitate business transaction and contracts. What's that?
It's got a computational component which Bitcoin doesn't have. So it's kind of interesting in that it could be a smart contract, but it could also be a contract to compute something, like a SETI thing or whatever, just some kind of computation, which makes it different. In my opinion, the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum is kind of the difference between a non commodity-backed currency and a commodity-backed currency, because at least Ethereum carries the potential to have a commodity on it, which is some computational output, which not a lot of people are doing interesting things with yet, but may.
But yeah, they may, and there are lots of other interesting things that are happening with Ethereum. So I certainly watch it. I don't have a lot of Ethereum, like I said. I just do faucets anyway. So and there aren't a lot of great Ethereum faucets out there.
There's also a new kind of backing store for a lot of these currencies is the blockchain. But in the tech group, one of our buddies, a very prominent fella in e-currency and payment space, he posted something called, I think it's Graph Hash is the name of it. Let me just double check. But it's really interesting because the way that currently things get written out to the blockchain sometimes can take an hour. That's why, like, when you buy something from your exchange, I forget, you use Coinbase, right?
For trading, yeah.
Right. So Coinbase, like, sometimes you'll buy stuff and it won't clear for, maybe a day, sometimes more, because it takes so long to get these write-outs for the blockchain. So this graph hash is, or Hashgraph, I should.
That's not an issue that's specific to Coinbase or any other wallet. That actually is more of
blockchain.
Yeah, it's a blockchain issue.
It's a blockchain issue. So what this tech is doing is it's an alternative backing from the blockchain, and instead of kind of having different nodes kind of vie for to write out miners to write out on the blockchain, it uses a gossip system, and if enough people are gossiping about your transaction, it will get written out. And what's interesting about this Hashgraph, and I'll add a link to the show notes on it, is that one, it's super fast. Like you're talking, you get basically a full write out to the entirety of the blockchain is done potentially inside of a second. And all of a sudden you get hundreds of thousands of, if not millions of transactions per, I think it was a minute or something like that, some crazy number like that, instead of just tens on blockchain. But the other thing that's interesting is that this gossip system is mathematically provable to be written within a certain way. So it's very, very new. But what to me is interesting is a lot of the ownership of Bitcoin is in China, and a lot of the ability to expand or not expand it is held by that voting block. If you get a new, and the expansion deals usually with blockchain expansion. If all of a sudden you get a new backing store for these currencies, it completely upends ownership there. And the market has yet to absorb that concept. And it could cause a lot of turmoil if and when it happens. So it's kind of super interesting days there with all this. And the other thing that's super interesting about the whole kind of cryptocurrency is, I think somebody else in the tech group mentioned, if all of a sudden you don't need banks to hold your currency anymore, what does that mean in this world, right? If you have systems that aggregate and give credit, and you don't need to deal with the bank to do that, and you can partake in that more directly, and they go away, what does that mean for the world? It's kind of a fascinating, it's almost very sci-fi, but it's really here today. And in the next couple of, in the next oncoming 5 years, it's going to have some serious ramifications. So very cool stuff. And so it's cool to see you actually wading in that kind of volatile pool.
Yeah, it's fun.
All right. I guess we're done with that.
I think we're done.
I can't remember any other zombie physics quips.
Endless topic.
I'm sure I'll have them for another day. All right, fellas. Well, thank you, Bryan.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Thanks for joining us, Walt. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it as always.
And on those popular topics, we'll see you next week.